Number 19. Joshua Hunt. 23-year-old Abby Conroy was on a late-night walk in Somerset, England in July of 2019 when an individual in a rubber gimp suit emerged from the darkness and charged at her without warning. She would later recall hearing her attacker grunting and breathing heavily as he rushed toward her. Thankfully, though, there were people nearby. As they helped Conroy chase the suspect away, she snapped a photo of him with her phone. The man vanished beyond some hedges, but it probably wasn't his first time doing something like this. In the 8 months leading up to the attack on Conroy, police had received 14 incident reports of a similar nature in the area. The experience had a detrimental impact on Conroy's well-being, especially since the walks she used to take to relieve stress had become a source of her anxiety. She said that some people told her women shouldn't walk alone at night, something many survivors have heard, and she disagreed with the outdated notion. And until the perpetrator was caught, Conroy said she would continue to feel unsafe around men, knowing she might cross paths with her suspect hiding in plain sight in regular clothing whenever she left the house. By the time police identified the suspect as 32-year-old Joshua Hunt, at least 25 reports had been filed about incidents involving the so-called Somerset Gimp. Hunt adamantly denied being the Gimp, but he failed to convince a court that he was being targeted in a case of mistaken identity. In November of 2023, a judge banned him from wearing a mask or a Gimp suit for 5 years. As part of the order, Hunt isn't allowed to even have a mask in his possession in public unless it's for medical purposes or required by law. He's also prohibited from crawling, wriggling, or writhing on the ground while wearing a full body covering or anything that resembles a full body covering. Number 18. Tyrie Parker. When U.S. Coast Guardsman Caroline Scholat saw someone breaking into her car outside her Jacksonville, Florida home early one morning in 2021, she ran outside with her gun and tried to stop the crime in progress. An armed standoff ensued as the 27-year-old ordered the suspect to stay where he was until police arrived. Unwilling to get nabbed by law enforcement right then and there, the suspect shot Caroline multiple times and fled the scene. Just days after getting engaged to her fiancé, Caroline's life was unexpectedly, tragically, and needlessly cut short. Described by authorities as a serial car thief, 22-year-old Tyrie Parker had allegedly broken into 8 other vehicles that day alone. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and he turned himself into law enforcement a week after the crime. He was charged with second-degree murder and armed burglary. Parker pleaded guilty to the charges the following year and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He apologized for his actions, saying that he wished he could bring a person back, but that he couldn't. For Caroline's loved ones, his words came as too little, too late, with the only somewhat positive takeaway being the fact that Parker will never be free to harm another innocent civilian again. Number 17. Charles Marcel Newman. While working private security in an exclusive Santa Monica neighborhood in November of 2023, a pair of off-duty police officers caught a homeless man trying to break into a residence at around 3:30 a.m. By then, 46-year-old Charles Marcel Newman had become a familiar fixture in the community, where he had allegedly tried breaking into the same house repeatedly over a several-month span. The homeowner had reported Newman to law enforcement several times in the previous 2 months, due to his unusual fascination with trying to get inside that specific home. Surveillance footage from past incidents showed the suspect trying various door handles and attempting to open windows. Newman was also seen pulling on the door handles of the homeowner's vehicles. At the time of the most recent incident, Newman was a parolee at large and a registered predator with a disturbing criminal history. Definitely not the type of guy you'd want to welcome into your home at any time of day, let alone in the middle of the night. He had previously served prison time for burglary and trespassing charges in 2012 and 2019, and while he seemed particularly fixated on one house in that neighborhood, he was suspected of committing other burglaries and attempted burglaries elsewhere throughout Los Angeles County. The off-duty cops detained Newman and called the police, who picked him up on suspicion of burglary and multiple attempted burglaries. He hasn't made headlines since then, and in this case, it's likely safe to assume that no news is good news. Number 16. Kenton Driscoll. When residents in Farmington Hills and elsewhere throughout Oakland County, Michigan were targeted by a serial prowler in early 2022, police took an ingenious approach to identifying the suspect without having to get too close to him. The suspect fled from officers on his bicycle, but he was incapable of outrunning a drone. With the advantage of a bird's-eye view, law enforcement tracked the creep to a wooded area and took him into custody without incident. Identified as 56-year-old Kenton Driscoll, the suspect was reportedly living in the forest and had faced similar criminal allegations in the past. 3 years earlier in 2019, he was arrested for prowling in the towns of Birmingham and Royal Oak. Sightings of the suspect began again the following year and continued for 2 years before he was arrested again. One local resident, Emily Torcher, told local station WXYZ that she found a man suspected to be Driscoll hiding in her garage one day. The incident left her son feeling terrified in his own home. And this was a feeling shared by other victims, including Dennis Furment, who saw Driscoll loitering around his home on surveillance footage. Driscoll's motive for prowling is unclear. In early 2023, he was deemed incompetent to stand trial. Psychiatric experts testified that the serial prowler made delusional remarks and engaged in hyperverbal speech. He interrupted the examiner several times and expressed signs of persecutory delusions, including in the form of remarks about the police and the judge being corrupt. According to one of the psychiatrists, Driscoll jumped rapidly from one topic to another and was somewhat uncooperative with the evaluation. He tried to represent himself in court, but the judge denied the request after concluding that he was unfit to argue his case. Following the incompetency ruling, Driscoll was taken to a state hospital for treatment with plans to undergo routine evaluations to determine whether his competency had been restored. If 15 months pass without his condition improving, the authorities will either have to release him without charge or take steps to forcibly institutionalize him on a more long-term basis. Number 15. Antonio Mack. A group of young women in San Diego's college area were horrified to discover that they were being watched by a stranger while they showered in late 2023. Jordan Grandy told NBC San Diego that she was totally creeped out, adding that she saw two glowing eyes staring at her in the dark. She turned surveillance footage of the man over to the police, who shared it with the public in hopes that someone would help identify the prowler. The video showed that the lurker spent 4 hours in her yard before she and other victims confronted him, causing him to flee the scene on foot. He looked like he was between 30 and 40 years old and appeared to be carrying his shoes. Shortly after the footage was shared with the public, 57-year-old Antonio Mack turned himself into law enforcement as the man in the video. He faces charges of prowling, peeping, and petty theft, and is suspected of targeting at least 2 different residences on 2 separate occasions. Number 14. Edward Corda III. A Pennsylvania man took stalking to a whole new level in February of 2024 when he was caught lurking outside a woman's home in night goggles, armed with a gun. New Hanover police responded to the scene in response to a 911 call from the victim, who reported someone creeping around outside her residence and knocking on her bedroom window. Officers arrived shortly before 1:30 a.m. to find 36-year-old Edward Corda III in the driveway with a loaded 9mm firearm and a loaded magazine. Corda allegedly tried to resist arrest but was safely taken into custody. In addition to not having a gun permit, he's a convicted felon, which automatically disqualifies him from owning or possessing a firearm. Despite this, a subsequent raid on his home turned up 3 more guns, including an AR-15 style assault rifle, a plethora of ammunition, holsters, a ballistics vest, a taser, and a suppressor. The weapons were registered to a 38-year-old Warminster woman named Kristen Zweigard. None of them were reported lost or stolen, leading investigators to believe that Zweigard bought the guns for Corda. She was charged with multiple felonies relating to the illegal purchase and sale of the weapons, including sales to ineligible transferee and materially false statements. Corda faces multiple counts for being a felon in possession of a gun, having a gun without a license, prohibited offensive weapons, illegal transfer of a firearm, resisting arrest, loitering, prowling at night, and other gun-related counts. Speaking with NBC 10, the victim said that she had a brief casual fling with Corda, but that they didn't officially date. She described feeling terrified even after the fact, especially when she thinks about what possibly could have happened if the situation had taken a wrong turn. Number 13. Todd Allen. Over 7 years beginning in 2012, a former Hutchinson, Kansas police officer pretended to be on duty during his time off and targeted women who were sitting alone in their cars at night. 53-year-old Todd Allen also posed as a park security officer during his missions to handpick his next victim, typically in parks and parking lots. The crooked cop approached by shining his flashlight into a woman's car and/or knocking on her window. He then asked questions in an accusatory tone about suspected drug use, ordered her into the back of her car or elsewhere, and proceeded to assault her. Allen was sometimes seen lurking around an area in a ski mask. He became so brazen that he was also known to sometimes take a female victim away from her car and assault her out of view while telling her boyfriend or passenger to wait in the vehicle. Several victims later said that they cooperated with the suspect's orders because they believed he was an on-duty officer. Starting in 2019, Allen started peeking into people's homes. He was finally caught 3 years later after he noticed he was standing in view of someone's home surveillance camera and tried shining his flashlight toward it to obscure his image. Allen ran from the scene, but police caught up with him and questioned him. He claimed that he was out on an innocent bike ride, but later admitted that he could have been the prowler in this and numerous other incidents in which he had become a suspect. While at work, Allen allegedly researched several cases that he was not assigned to investigate in the police database. He later admitted to committing those acts and to being the so-called Park Prowler. In April of 2023, Allen pleaded guilty to 12 felony charges stemming from the assaults of 10 women. He was sentenced to 23.5 years in prison with an earliest possible release date in 2043 and will be on strict parole afterward. Number 12. Assad Aar. Most peeping toms seem primarily concerned with avoiding trouble with law enforcement, but the police would have been the least of 57-year-old Assad Aar's problems when he was caught staring into a woman's Fort Lauderdale home in 2018. Police received a 911 call from the woman, Samantha Hobie, shortly before midnight, and it wasn't their first time hearing from her. The unwanted spectator had allegedly been peering in through the Hobie's windows for years, and she had reported him multiple times in the past. During her conversation with the 911 dispatcher, Hobie said that her boyfriend was trying to restrain the peeping tom until the police arrived. She could be heard saying, "Tori, stop, that's enough," over and over. Officers arrived to find a car unresponsive on the ground. He had been badly beaten by the woman's boyfriend, 30-year-old Victor Van Vickery II, who was naked and covered in Aar's blood. Vickery told police that he and Hobie were being intimate when they heard a scratch against a bedroom window. With no time to get dressed, he rushed outside to find a car with his pants down. A fight ensued between the two men, and Vickery later claimed that he acted out of fear for his life. No arrests were immediately made. Hobie initially told police that she also hit a car, but she later went down to the police station and recanted her statement, claiming that Vickery had told her to say that she participated in the beating. And while Aar had a known history of staring into women's windows, Vickery wasn't exactly a morally upstanding citizen himself. In the month following the fatal attack on Aar, Vickery was arrested for assaulting a woman, and Hobie obtained a restraining order against him. In October of 2019, Vickery was arrested on a manslaughter charge. 3 years later, he was arrested on suspicion of fraud for allegedly trying to sue Uber based on a false claim that he was in an accident involving one of its drivers. Even more recently, in 2023, Vickery was hit with federal charges for allegedly conspiring to defraud Medicare in a medical equipment billing scam. Number 11. Khalees Karen Crowder. In August of 2023, police in Glendale, California arrested a suspected prowler who was seen sneaking around a family's home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Identified as a 36-year-old ex-convict named Khalees Karen Crowder, the suspect has a history of prowling offenses. He also served an 8-year prison sentence for a string of home burglaries that he was sentenced for in 2011. More recently, Crowder was arrested for peeping while loitering and pleaded no contest to the charge. The judge sentenced him to 60 days in jail and ordered him to attend a treatment program to help him control his inappropriate urges. But despite being sentenced to jail time, he was released from custody after a few days, with instructions to return to court at a later date for a progress hearing. Crowder has been in and out of jail several times since then and has remained behind bars without bail since January of 2024. In addition to his history of prowling, Crowder is a person of interest in multiple similar incidents that have occurred throughout the area. Many people suspected that he was the same man who was caught crouching behind a woman and sniffing her rear end while she was trying to shop in a Barnes & Noble store in Burbank. Footage of the terrifyingly creepy behavior went viral on TikTok and caught the attention of law enforcement following Crowder's latest prowling arrest. Number 10. Alexander Young. Operating mostly under the cover of darkness, 23-year-old Alexander Young attacked at least 5 women in the Scottish town of Falkirk over a several-month period, starting in the summer of 2021. He typically followed closely behind his victims at night, sometimes targeting the same victim on multiple occasions. In some cases, he approached the victim and asked questions like where she was going and where she lived. According to authorities, he behaved in a threatening or abusive manner, causing fear among all his targets. Young committed all of these crimes while he was out on bail for stalking allegations from the previous year. He also violated a court-ordered 7 p.m. curfew on at least one occasion. Due to the seriousness and the number of allegations against him, his case went to a high court, which has the power to impose more severe consequences than a traditional court. Young ultimately admitted to 6 offenses. He was given an order for lifelong restriction with a minimum of 3 years in prison after the judge concluded that incarceration was the only option for keeping society safe from him. While handing down a sentence, the judge made it clear that Young would only ever see freedom again if and when a parole board decided that he was no longer a threat to public safety. Number 9. The Geelong Night Stalker. Over a more than 3-month period starting in January of 2023, a masked man nicknamed the Geelong Night Stalker was seen lurking outside dozens of homes in western Melbourne, Geelong, and the Surf Coast in Australia's Victoria state. Disturbing footage showed the mysterious creep loitering on at least 25 properties and attempting to enter houses at night. In most cases, he was unsuccessful thanks to people locking their doors, but at least 2 break-ins were reported. In addition to wearing a mask, the Night Stalker sported a wide-brimmed hat in an apparent attempt to conceal his identity. And it unfortunately worked, because he has never been caught despite making widespread news headlines. Sergeant Gavin Mullins told the morning talk show Sunrise that one of the most disturbing aspects of the man's behavior is his apparent lack of a motive. Police couldn't figure out why he was doing what he was doing, especially since he didn't seem particularly determined to get inside people's houses, even though he was curious enough to jiggle the door handle and see if it opened. No property was reported stolen, and the suspect didn't make contact with any of the residents inside the homes he targeted. The Night Stalker fell largely out of the spotlight after March of 2023, indicating that he has either stopped lurking in the area, perhaps due to the intensive media coverage he received, or because the news eventually stopped reporting on him. His identity appears to remain a mystery, despite repeated appeals to the public for help figuring out who he was. Number 8. Jeffrey Loven. There's a common saying that a restraining order is nothing more than a piece of paper, meaning it will not stop someone who is determined enough to access their victim. This appeared to be the case for a disgraced former radiologist named Jeffrey Loven, who was accused of violating a victim's protective order 4 times in 1 week in 2022. Loven's arrest came after he was seen lurking outside the victim's San Diego home in September of that year. Surveillance footage showed him climbing onto the roof in order to access the victim's courtyard. In one of the incidents, Loven approached the victim's door with a bottle of wine. He was arrested 4 separate times that week and posted bail each time, but ran away when approached by a reporter. Back in 2019, Loven was accused of targeting his ex-wife with similar prowling behavior. He pleaded guilty to several charges and served time behind bars for his actions. Speaking with ABC 10 News, the more recent victim confirmed that she and Loven had previously dated and that she has an order of protection against him until the year 2031. She expressed a fear that many stalking victims have voiced in the past, that even if Loven eventually stopped stalking her, it didn't mean his stalking days would be over. He would move on to other victims, and people would continue to suffer and live in fear at his hands. While it's true that a restraining order is a piece of paper, it's meant to lay the groundwork for heightened consequences in the event that the offender violates. But as Loven's case proves, it doesn't always play out like this. After seeing her stalker get released time and time again, the woman felt she had no choice but to have a male friend move in to keep her and her children safe. But even with him there, she remained on edge and was unable to live in peace, knowing that it was likely not a matter of if, but when her stalker struck again. Number 7. The Shoreditch Prowler. At least 4 women were violently drugged and assaulted in 2019 and 2020 by a serial attacker while walking in London's Shoreditch area late at night. They had total amnesia and didn't remember anything that happened after they were drugged, other than occasional traumatic flashbacks of being forcibly assaulted and incapable of reacting. When they regained consciousness, the victims' wallets, jewelry, phones, and other personal belongings were gone, leaving them unable to call for help and reliant on strangers to assist them. Known only as the Shoreditch Prowler, the predator's identity remained a mystery until investigators finally caught a break in 2021 thanks to DNA evidence. Identified as 38-year-old Clement Omoregbe, the attacker was on a suspended prison sentence for a previous burglary case at the time of the assaults. Omoregbe denied the crimes. His refusal to take responsibility for his actions meant that the victims had to endure the re-traumatizing process of testifying against him in court. He pleaded guilty to 6 counts of fraud and theft for stealing the victims' belongings, and was convicted of 6 other charges for the attacks. The judge sentenced Omoregbe to life with a minimum of more than 13 years, ensuring that he won't step foot into free society anytime soon, and hopefully never again, period. Upon learning his sentence, he stormed out of the dock and into the courtroom while yelling at the judge, but there was nothing he could do to change his fate, and he only had himself to thank for where he ended up. Number 6. Timothy Manus. In early 2015, an unidentified creep was seen lurking outside women's homes near the University of California, Santa Cruz late at night. He video recorded at least 4 women while watching them through their windows. The man's identity remained elusive until a quick-thinking college student named Haley Wolford cracked the case. In what could have only been a terrifying experience, she was lying in bed when she noticed someone sliding her bedroom window open. She was waiting for it to happen, given his repeated appearances throughout the neighborhood, and was ready with a flashlight in one hand and her phone in the other. Before the suspect could run away, Wolford shined the flashlight at him and took photos of him with her phone as he stood in her enclosed patio. The young woman later told local station KSBW that the Prowler tried making excuses for his presence, claiming he had lost his hat. But she was in no mood for games and yelled at him to immediately get off her property. She then called the police, who identified the man as 28-year-old Timothy Manus, a security guard who worked nearby. Investigators theorized that the area was convenient for Manus to creep around in after he got off work, but his behavior was put to an abrupt end thanks to Wolford. Manus was promptly fired from his job and arrested on 16 criminal charges, including felony stalking and burglary, along with misdemeanor counts of privacy, aggravated trespassing, and peeping. Number 5. Salah Alizada. Over 2 months starting in December of 2016, a serial prowler terrorized women while they walked alone at night in the English town of Gateshead. In the first incident, he walked out from behind some trees and exposed himself to the victim along a deserted road. About a week later, he pinched a woman's behind while offering her a cigarette as she walked home from a friend's house. When the victim attempted to get away, the suspect allegedly grabbed her and pinned her against a wall. The woman scratched her attacker in self-defense, and he responded by biting her face. A few weeks later, a third victim described being assaulted in a very similar fashion to the second woman. She screamed as loudly as she could, causing the attacker to stop, and the victim snapped a photo of the man with her cell phone as he fled the scene. A security guard recognized the suspect in the street after seeing the woman's photo and alerted police. Using DNA evidence from the victim who was bitten in the face, investigators confirmed the suspect's identity as 42-year-old Salah Alizada, an Iranian national who was in the UK illegally at the time of the attacks. He pleaded guilty to exposure and 2 counts of assault and was sentenced to more than 3.5 years in prison. Alizada's defense attorney told the court that he was eager to reconnect with his family back in Iran, and that was likely a good thing because he was most likely deported upon his release from prison anyway. Number 4. Troy Dean Stewart. Late one night in January of 2024, a Cape Coral, Florida resident called 911 and reported someone lurking behind a chair in their yard and moving between adjacent properties. The caller described the suspect as wearing a grey hoodie, black shorts, and a dark mask. Responding officers tracked down a man matching the description in an empty lot nearby, where they found him lying on his stomach near a seawall. Identified as Troy Dean Stewart, the man allegedly claimed that he was out for a run to enjoy the scenery, but that he was hiding because two men had confronted him. When questioned about the pair of underwear around his neck, he said that he was using them as a mask to shield his face from the cold. As it turned out, Stewart was telling the truth about being confronted by two men, but he failed to explain why. One of the men told officers that he had seen someone lurking in his backyard. The other man said that someone resembling Stewart had stolen some of his bonsai plants, valued at $7,000, and that it looked like he was about to steal more. Police paid a visit to Stewart's residence, where they found some bonsai plants which did not resemble the stolen ones. Stewart allegedly denied any knowledge of the bonsai thefts and was arrested on a loitering and prowling charge. Number 3. Jared Silas Pcel. Throughout much of 2021, a serial prowler made repeated appearances in Toronto's Leslieville neighborhood. He was sometimes seen riding a bicycle and was known for trying to gain entry into people's homes late at night and during the early morning hours, leaving local residents feeling terrified. The unwelcome visits began in May, and the suspect was finally identified as 40-year-old Jared Silas Pcel 5 months later. In October of 2021, Pcel was charged with 4 counts of attempting to break and enter, 2 counts of prowling by night, 2 counts of trespass by night, criminal harassment, assault, and more. He was arrested again in January of 2022 on suspicion of attempting to break and enter, assault theft under $5,000, mischief, damage to property under $5,000, and 4 probation violations. One woman encountered Pcel while she was on her way home. She told police that he ripped her phone out of her hand, smashed it against the ground, and then ran away. Suspecting that she had just crossed paths with the infamous neighborhood prowler, she filed a police report. But it unfortunately only got him off the streets for a brief period before he was released and went right back to wreaking havoc throughout the neighborhood. By the time Pcel was arrested again in July of 2022, local residents were becoming fed up with his continued presence and the legal system's apparent failure to take meaningful action. Victims were nevertheless encouraged to continue reporting incidents to the police, even though it seemed like very little was being done to truly address the problem. Number 2. The Wimbledon Prowler. Starting in the early 2000s, a serial night burglar targeted homes belonging to the rich and famous in the London suburb of Wimbledon. The break-ins went on for more than a decade, while law enforcement struggled to identify him. In the meantime, residents of the upscale community couldn't understand why their belongings were going missing. Many assumed that a member of their domestic staff was to blame and fired their nannies, housekeepers, chauffeurs, and other employees. It eventually became evident that a night prowler was robbing houses. At the height of the investigation, there were as many as 50 members of law enforcement working the case full-time, and as many as 60 individuals on the suspect list. Finally, though, in 2019, DNA evidence linked the burglaries to 43-year-old Astrid Kapaj, a father of 2 from Albania, who appeared to live a normal life outside his crimes. Kapaj pleaded guilty to 22 burglaries, but police believe he may have been responsible for 10 times that many, with the estimated total value of cash and jewelry that he stole ranging anywhere from £500,000 to £5 million. In the end, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison. It took investigators a long time to catch Kapaj due to the level of skill and stealth that he operated with. He went unnoticed to the point where he was never even on the suspect list until shortly before his capture. Kapaj planned each heist right down to the smallest detail and took relatively small amounts of money and valuables compared to what was actually available at each scene. He also repaired any damage he caused during the robberies. Despite the small fortune of goods and cash that Kapaj made off with over the years, he was in debt at the time of his arrest. He stole to fund his gambling addiction and had nothing to show for his ill-gotten gains. Police were unable to trace the movements of the stolen goods, and Kapaj never told them what he did with the items. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Jerry Williams. A New Hampshire woman was at home in Salisbury on an ordinary Sunday in early 2024 when she began receiving text messages from someone claiming to be a state police captain. In their attempts to gain information about the woman, the individual told her that she was being monitored and that there were eyes on her house. Certain details in the text messages led the woman to believe she was actively being watched. While reviewing home surveillance footage, she discovered someone lurking around her house and peering in through the windows. Knowing that the police were unlikely to behave in such an unprofessional and creepy manner, she called the real cops and filed a report. There was nobody on the property when the police arrived, but the woman turned over the security video, which led to investigators identifying the suspect as 46-year-old Jerry Williams of Salisbury. He isn't a member of law enforcement and is now facing charges of felony false impersonation, along with misdemeanor counts of harassment and stalking. Williams was also charged with trespassing and loitering prowling violations. Authorities have not disclosed a possible motive for the crimes or whether the suspect and victim have any prior connections.
Number 8. Dead dolls. Anatoly Moskvin was an unusual kid. He and his friends would wander around cemeteries and look at graves of random people. That's not super weird because people visit their deceased loved ones at the graves all the time. But for Anatoly, this was a seed that grew into something no one was expecting. One of the days that the boys were exploring, they went to the Krasnaya Etna Cemetery, where Anatoly saw the funeral procession of a 12-year-old girl. But this wasn't your typical funeral. According to 11-year-old Anatoly, this was a burial ritual. When the people from the funeral saw Anatoly, multiple men in black came over and took him to the body of the dead girl. The men forced Anatoly to kiss the girl's forehead, even though he didn't want to. The girl's mother then put a wedding ring on his hand and another ring on his daughter's hand. This was an experience that would traumatize any kid, even one that was seemingly okay with being around death. It was an experience that pretty much changed the way he lived his life from that point on. He slowly became obsessed with death. This just got worse for him as an adult. Anatoly claimed to have inspected over 750 cemeteries in the span of only 2.5 years. He also wrote a bunch of books, translations, and research papers on various death-related topics. He considered himself a necropolis and also said that he was an expert when it came to the cemeteries in the Nizhny Novgorod region, which is where he grew up. When the death obsession took over, Anatoly started living a life of isolation. One day, police went to Anatoly's flat to question him about something they were working on, because he was an expert and lived in the area that they had been searching. Police weren't expecting to find what they did. They discovered several dolls in his garage. These weren't regular dolls, though. They were made from the human remains of young girls. They found 26 bodies all scattered around Anatoly's house, with some on his sofa and on his shelves. They even found instructions on how to turn human bodies into dolls. When asked why he did all of this, Anatoly said that he felt bad for dead children and thought that he could possibly bring them back through science or black magic. He had been doing this for over 20 years of his life. Anatoly claims that he had never dug up a grave without the permission of the person inside of it. He also thought the spirits of the body would feel more comfortable and appreciated if they were in a warm place where they would be more willing to talk. But since he couldn't just bring bones with him to his house, he decided to make them into dolls. According to Anatoly, he was fully aware that he was committing a serious crime, but did it anyway because he thought the voices of these children needed to be heard. Anatoly was charged with the desecration of graves and dead bodies and given 5 years in prison. A psychiatric evaluation was administered, and it was revealed that he'd actually suffered from a form of paranoid schizophrenia. In 2012, Leninsky District Court said that he was unfit to stand trial. Instead, he was sentenced to coercive medical measures. Number 7. The Backstabbers. On July 5, 2012, 16-year-old Skylar Neese was reported missing by her parents. She had left for work the day before and never returned. This was extremely concerning because Skylar wasn't the kind of girl to just disappear or stay out without letting anyone know where she was. Later in the day, her mother got a call from one of Skylar's friends, Sheila. who told her that Skylar had snuck out with her and another friend, Rachel. According to Sheila, they spent the whole night driving around, getting high, before the girls dropped Skylar off down the street from her home. After getting this information, the police found security camera footage of Skylar jumping out of her window around midnight and getting into a car with her friends. Since she left on her own accord, Skylar wasn't eligible for an Amber Alert, so all the parents could do was wait, and wait, and wait. They waited for months, but Skylar never came back. In January of 2013, Rachel cracked. She felt extremely guilty and admitted to the murder of Skylar's niece. She also revealed that Sheila was in on it. When the police asked them why they killed their friend, both the girls said they were bored of her. After preparing for weeks, the girls drove Skylar to the Pennsylvania border with all the supplies they needed to get away with murder. They ended up stabbing Skylar over 50 times. They decided to bury her body near a tree. After the police found her remains and confirmed that it was actually Skylar's niece, both the girls were arrested and charged with murder, second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and kidnapping. They were sentenced to over 40 years in prison for their crimes. Number 6. Revenge. 16-year-old Erin Caffey was the typical rebellious teenager that never wanted to go to church with a religious family. She was dating Charlie Wilkeson, who was considered the bad boy of their neighborhood. Obviously, neither of her parents approved of the relationship and told Erin that she needed to break up with Charlie. Erin was furious and started crying, but she agreed to break up with Charlie. But that actually wasn't the case. Erin came to a realization that she would get back at her parents for controlling every little thing in her life. So Erin and Charlie decided to do the worst thing imaginable. They decided to murder her entire family. On March 1st, 2008, Charlie went to Erin's house with his two friends and told Erin to come out. They told her that they were going to shoot her parents, but they would need to kill her brothers as well to make sure there were no witnesses. Erin said that she didn't care and told them to do what you gotta do. Her brothers were 8 and 13 years old. Charlie and his friends ended up brutally slaughtering every single person in Erin's family. They thought they would get away with it by lighting the house on fire. But what they didn't know was that Erin's father actually survived being shot several times. He immediately called 911 and was taken to the ICU, where he was treated for his wounds. The rest of the family wasn't so lucky. They suffered from smoke inhalation, which means they were still breathing when the house was on fire. Within hours, everyone involved was arrested, and Charles admitted to the murder. He even revealed that the whole thing was Erin's idea. Erin and Charlie, along with their friends, all received life sentences, with Erin not being eligible for parole until she served a minimum of 40 years. Number 5. Enough is enough. In 1991, a successful 23-year-old model named Omema Nelson married 56-year-old Bill Nelson. At first, everything was rainbows and sunshine for Omema. However, things started going south just a few months into their marriage. Her husband became mentally, physically, and sexually abusive towards her. Around Thanksgiving, Omema had enough of the abuse and completely snapped. On Thanksgiving, she stabbed Bill with scissors several times and beat him with an iron until he was dead. After that, she chopped up his body and boiled some bits and parts. She put his head in the freezer and his hands in a dish mixed with turkey meat. She started panicking and went to her ex-boyfriend's house. She told him that Bill attacked her and she killed him in self-defense. She then told him to get rid of the body and offered him $75,000 for it. Her ex, Jose Esquivel, told her that he would take care of it. But when she left, he actually called the police and told them everything. The police found Bill's remains at their house and arrested Omema for his murder. She admitted to killing him and was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Do you think her crime was justified? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 4. Two-Faced. Lindsay Hawker decided to take a year off school and go to Japan to teach children English. Little did she know that decision would come at the cost of her life. On March 20th, 2007, Lindsay was heading home from a long day at work when a man approached her. He told her he wanted her to be his English teacher. Lindsay, being creeped out by the random stranger, ran home. But the man followed her home and asked her once again to teach him English. Lindsay ended up agreeing after he offered her $35 an hour for the job. They met a few days later for the lesson at a nearby cafe. After the lesson, the man, whose name was Tatsuya Ichihashi, told Lindsay that he had left his wallet at his house and that she should come with him since it was just a few minutes away from the cafe. She reluctantly agreed. That was the last time she was ever seen. Tatsuya ended up murdering Lindsay at his apartment. He put her body in his bathtub, which he later moved to his balcony. He covered her corpse in a decomposition accelerator and soil. Then he planted some flowers. Lindsay's roommates reported her missing and informed the police of Tatsuya Ichihashi. They went to his apartment and found Lindsay's body decomposing in the tub under the soil, but there was no sign of Tatsuya. Tatsuya went on the run and started changing his appearance with plastic surgery, removing his moles and even cutting off his own lip. But the last plastic surgeon he went to recognized him from media outlets and called the police. Tatsuya Ichihashi was arrested and charged with sexual assault and murder. He was given a death sentence, which is pretty rare in Japan. Number 3. The Smartwatch. Jeff West met Kathleen Dawn in 2004, and it was basically love at first sight. Just 4 months later, the two ended up getting married and moved to Las Vegas for a fresh start. Their marriage was great, and they even had 2 kids together. However, things started to go downhill when Kathleen became a cam girl. She charged $15.99 a month, and all of Jeff's friends decided to subscribe. He was constantly being teased by everyone he knew, and Jeff started getting really mad. He wanted Kathleen to himself. He didn't want to share her with the world. He told her to stop, but Kathleen just told him to deal with it. They started fighting every day. Jeff decided he had to get rid of her. On January 12, 2018, the two went on a date. The day seemed pretty good, and they went to bed around 10 p.m. However, the next day, Kathleen was found dead outside her house with a bottle of absinthe. When the police found her, it looked like she got hit by a car, but the police were convinced the whole thing was staged. They questioned Jeff, but he had a pretty convincing story. At one point, the police were basically 100% sure that Jeff was the murderer, but they had no proof. That was until Jeff's smartwatch revealed that he was actually awake during the time of the murder. On top of that, the home security app on the watch also showed that the doors were opened and closed at around 10:53. On November 20th, 2020, after a 4-day trial, Jeff was found guilty of manslaughter and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. To this day, Jeff has not admitted to murdering his wife and still says that he was sleeping when she died. Number 2. Young Blood. Mary Bell was born on May 26, 1957 by Betty McCricket, a 16-year-old prostitute. Her mother resented her from birth. The abuse started almost immediately. Betty actually had an older daughter that reported all the horrible things Betty did to Mary. She threw her out of the window and fell 2 stories. By some miracle, Mary survived the fall. Betty even made Mary drink bleach at one point, but that didn't work either. When Mary turned 5 years old, Betty forced her into prostitution. They lived in a pretty poor area, and there wasn't much she could do about it. Having such a horrible childhood, it's no surprise that Mary turned out kinda crazy. To distract herself from everything that was going wrong in her life, she decided to kill people. In May of 1968, 3 mothers went to the police and informed them that Mary had tried to choke their children. However, the police just let it go, since none of the children were seriously injured, and Mary was only 11 years old. And the fact that it was in the 60s probably played a role in it too. A few days later, Mary took a 4-year-old boy to an abandoned house. There, she strangled him to death and just left with a friend, Norma. When the police found his body, they didn't have enough evidence, so they just ruled his death as suicide. Later on, Mary and Norma took 3-year-old Brian Howe to a demolition site and strangled him to death. They also used scissors to cut his hair, cut his entire body, and even mutilated his genitals. On top of that, they carved the letter N, which they later changed to M. At this point, Mary was looking pretty suspicious, and the police brought her in for questioning. Mary was found guilty of manslaughter on December 17, 1968. Number 1. Poisoned. In January of 2020, a 53-year-old South Carolina nurse, Lana Sue Clayton, was arrested for poisoning her husband with eye drops. Her husband, 64-year-old Stephen Clayton, passed away in mid-2018 at a lake near their home. Lana hid Stephen's phone, so he wasn't able to call the ambulance. Lana claims that she didn't want to kill him. Instead, she wanted to make him a little uncomfortable. She also said that she was a victim of abuse and that she was just trying to protect herself. Unfortunately for Lana, the prosecutors didn't believe her at all and thought that she intentionally poisoned Stephen. Stephen Clayton was actually a millionaire, so prosecutors thought she was just out to get his money. Even the judge of the case, Paul Burge, said that her statement didn't make any sense, since Lana could just go to the police if she was actually being abused, or she could have literally just divorced him instead of murdering him. Lana actually told everyone that her husband fell from the roof of their mansion and died. However, the police did a toxicology report, which showed that Stephen actually died from extremely high levels of tetrahydrozoline. It was later revealed that Lana destroyed the will her husband made before she killed him, so that she would get all the money he would leave behind. Lana was charged with manslaughter and was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Would you rather have a serial prowler in your neighborhood who lurks around people's homes but never tries to break and enter, and has also never been caught by the police? Or be the victim of a one-time home break-in that comes with the loss of some of your valuables? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.